Hi and welcome to another podcast episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to update you on my spring knitting and how it's been going so far, and unfortunately it hasn't been going as I expected, so this episode will be filled with a lot of ups and downs. And as always, grab a drink, grab your knitting, and let's get started. Before I begin, please consider subscribing to this channel. I would really love to see you here again for my future episodes. I'm gonna start with the finished objects that I finished back in February. I just haven't had the chance to show them to you yet, and my first one is the Elise Scarf by Susanne Müller. I love how small and elegant this turned out. I really like it. I used one strand of sock yarn for this. I originally, if you remember, wanted to use a combination of yarns. This is a hand-dyed sock yarn from my local yarn store. It was a mini skein. I bought 2 mini skeins for this, and this is a silk mohair from a brand called Filamo. It's a Ukrainian brand, and I wanted to pair them because they looked really similar to me. They're both in this mauve color, but when I cast it on as intended with 2 strands of yarn, I just found that they really clash and they don't match each other. It looked really scrappy. I could literally see the individual strands of silk mohair kind of wrap around the sock yarn, and I ended up unraveling it and just using the sock yarn, which unfortunately meant that I had to size down my needles really significantly. I ended up knitting this on 2.5mm needles, and it meant that this project wasn't really fun to knit. I realized that the thing that really keeps me engaged when I'm knitting these kinds of small scarves or chalets is the fact that I'm always either increasing or decreasing, like I'm doing some kind of shaping. I don't know if you can call it shaping, but something is always interesting and different, and my stitch count is always changing. But here you only have increases and decreases at the beginning and at the end, but otherwise you just continue these eyelets throughout. You have the same stitch count, and it got so repetitive, especially on small needles. At some point I started to get motion sickness from knitting this, which never happened before. I never got motion sickness from knitting, even if I was knitting in like a bus or a car, or it just never happened to me before. And yeah, I just had to really power through with this one and make sure that it's finished as soon as possible so I don't have to like look at it anymore. And I tried to follow the pattern's directions on like the amount of repeats I need to do, but because my gauge was so different and a lot smaller than the pattern intends for, I just kind of stopped at some point. Even though I wanted to use both mini skeins of this yarn to make this scarf, I, as you can see, gave up a little early. I don't know. My sink is really trying to get its 2 minutes of fame in every video I record. As I was saying, I have no idea what to do with the remaining amount. It's really, really small. I'm not really planning to make any socks in the near future, but I'm gonna keep it. I'm not gonna like throw it away or something. I also don't know what to do with this mohair. I ended up only like using 10 meters of it before I unraveled my first attempt and started to knit it just with the sock yarn. But honestly, I've been really warming up to the idea of actually making something out of those Botanica flowers, which is a pattern from Midori Hirose. It's just for different type of like spring blossoms and flowers. Maybe I'm really delusional because I've never knit a flower like this before and I don't really get how fiddly and how time consuming it is, but in my, again, delusional dreams, I envision a whole dress or like a full skirt made out of these flowers. So I'm slowly kind of piling up my leftover mohairs to maybe start planning something out of those flowers at some point. And I think it's gonna be really grand and really beautiful, but I think I might change my mind pretty drastically once I start actually knitting the flowers. But for now, let me dream, okay? Let me just live in my delusional world where I go around my town, wearing a really big, elaborate dress covered in mohair flowers. There are 2 things I wanted to note about this pattern. First of all, it's not charted, which I didn't really see as an issue. I found the written instructions to be sufficient enough for me to remember the repeats pretty easily and then just kind of follow my memory while knitting this. But if you're used to having charts, especially for these kinds of lacy repeats, you might find it to be a little bit annoying, but I didn't see it as a problem. And the second thing is that this garter edge at the sides is really kind of folding on itself, which is not a bad thing. I'm saying this because I realized that this pattern can be technically used as a nice base for a double layered maybe button band or belt, or maybe straps for like nice camisole, or maybe straps for a knit bag. So definitely something to consider. You can mattress stitch the I-cord edge here, or maybe not do an I-cord and do a regular garter edge stitch instead and just attach it on this side. But I think it would be really fun to incorporate this pattern into other knits you do and like elevate them a little bit. To be honest with you, I only wore this scarf once since I made it as an actual scarf, because there's another scarf project that really kind of pushed aside all of my other neck accessories. But I did wear it a couple of times as a hair tie or like a hair accessory. I made a regular ponytail and then just tied this scarf around it, which was really fun. And I think I would actually prefer to wear it as a hair tie as opposed to as a scarf. And unfortunately, I probably won't be making another Elise scarf again because it just made me too nauseous. Or maybe this was an issue because I went down in needle size and was working in a smaller gauge than intended. I'm not sure, but at the same time, the pattern is still too repetitive. I'm not really sure I'm interested in making it again, especially with so many different interesting scarf patterns coming out all the time. I only have one finished garment to show you in this video, and this is my cloud sweater, which I also finished back in February. I already wore it in a video and I have been wearing it constantly, just in general. I wasn't really expecting this project to be as successful as it turned out to be. It all started with this hand-dyed yarn, which I picked up in January in my local yarn store. I absolutely fell in love with this fuchsia color, but they only had 2 skeins of this, so it gave me 1,000 meters in total to work with. And I really wanted to try and stretch it into a full garment, a full sweater, but I could only use this yarn to make a stockinette project, which I did in the end, and it turned out really well. But I also paired it with these 2 yarns, and I already talked about my yarn choices for the cloud sweater, so I'm not gonna repeat myself too much, but these 3 yarns gave me a really nice and drapey fabric. As you can see, I have some left over, which probably means that it also either will go towards my Botanica delusional future project or maybe a nice December bow to wear with the cloud sweater. I'm not sure yet, but as I was saying, I wasn't really able to make anything too textured or also too oversized with this yarn. I wanted to find a project where I can really rely on the meterage estimates, which meant that a Petiteknit pattern was the most kind of sound and obvious choice for me in this situation, because I really do trust her meterage estimates and her size guide. So I ended up knitting the cloud sweater in size S, which was a lot less positive ease than I'm used to, but it worked out in the end. I'm really surprised at how well this sweater fits me and how slouchy, but like not too big it is. I can safely say that I'm gonna be making another cloud sweater in the future, but probably in a bigger size and a more kind of basic colorway, because I found that especially recently, a lot of my projects are a bit too colorful, a bit too out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoy wearing them, but I feel that it would be nice to have a really basic and beige garment. I don't know, oversized stockinette sweater would have been nice. It's not as fun to show on the podcast and it's not as interesting to knit, but something I kind of have to consider for practicality's sake. In general, I really enjoyed the cloud sweater pattern. I adore these rolled stockinette edges. I think they look really, really cute. I did make some tiny modifications for this. I used a smaller needle size for this ribbing section here and for the rolled cuff edge, and also for the neckline here. The pattern, like basically you knit everything on 4.5 millimeters, but I did go down a needle size for the neckline here because I wanted it to be a bit more structured, but I still cast off in 4.5 millimeters because stockinette is not as stretchy as ribbing would be, so I needed to make sure I can actually like get it over my head. Here for the ribbing, I went down to 4 millimeters again because the ribbing here on 4.5 looked really wonky and open, and this is a big pet peeve of mine in general. And by pet peeve, I mean something that others really don't mind, but it really grinds my gears when I see it. And it's really wonky and open ribbing on garments. I'm not going to show any examples for obvious reasons. You probably know what I'm talking about, and I don't want to shame anyone. And I do understand that it can depend on just a million different things, on your attention, on the yarn you're using, the pattern you're making, your knitting experience in general. But when I see a garment that is technically well made and it's made from a really nice yarn and it fits the person beautifully and the pattern is nice, but on the edges, everywhere where there's ribbing, you see this super wonky, open, stretched out ribbing, it just really breaks my heart because it's so easily fixable. I usually just pick up or make more stitches when I do ribbing. You can also go down a needle size even more than the pattern tells you to. For example, if I'm knitting a cuff and it has like 60 stitches and it says that I need to go down a needle size from like 4.5 to 4, I will go down to 3.5, and on those like 60 stitches before I start the ribbing, I will pick up a stitch every like 4th or 5th stitch. You don't have to go overboard and increase every like 3rd or 2nd stitch. It will just end up making your fabric look really fluty and really kind of wavy, which you don't want probably. But if you increase just a tiny bit, like maybe pick up 10 extra stitches around your work, it will really make a difference because it will make your ribbing a lot more dense, and the individual kind of lines of your ribbing will not be as stretched out. So that's something I usually do to my sweaters. It's my kind of standard notification. Yeah, notification, that's what I wanted to say. Anyway, I didn't actually increase the stitch count here for the cuff. I just went down the needle size for the ribbing and then the stockinette curled portion, but I also did some short row shaping at the hem, which is another standard notification of mine, something I usually do to my sweaters, which sounds kind of intimidating, like I'm, you know, torturing my sweaters or something I do to my sweaters, but you know what I mean. I just like the front to be a bit shorter than the back. Another tiny change is that I didn't do any pearl rounds or like reverse stockinette rounds here when I started the sleeve. I just didn't want it. Also, my boyfriend kind of ruined the sweater for me because he said that this color reminds him of horseradish with beetroot, which is kind of a traditional Ukrainian garnish. Now I can't unsee it, so thank you for that if you're watching this. I literally couldn't care less if I look like a human beetroot in this. I really like this color and it makes me really happy. The only small or like even tiny downside of this really, I would say, cool toned fuchsia color is that it makes any redness or like pimples on my skin look really prominent because my skin is really pale, and this kind of color next to my face really enhances it. So if I wear this sweater and I don't have any makeup on, I look a lot more red than I am actually. It's similar to what happens when you're wearing red lipstick and it kind of exaggerates any redness you have in your skin. But if being an honorary human beetroot means that I have to put on foundation, I'm absolutely fine with that. Well, speaking of red lipstick, I realized I haven't worn mine in like a year and a half, probably more. So I decided to put it on just for fun. And if you're interested by any chance, this is a lipstick from Dior. It's their mini Dior Rouge lipstick in the shade 999 satin. And the reason I have a mini version is because it was cheaper than the regular version. I wasn't really in the mood to spend like 30 bucks on a lipstick, but it is really fancy. So yeah, apparently I'm a beauty guru now, and I really hope I don't smudge it all over my knits, but let's continue. My next finished object is my Rikke Scarf, and I am so in love with this finished object. I wasn't really expecting it to turn out as successful, just similar to what happened with the cloud sweater. Maybe I'm underestimating my projects now that I think about it. It's one of those banger projects I talked about. I really love how versatile it is. I adore this color, this like honey camel beige color. I have been wearing it since I made it pretty much every time I leave the house. I either tie it around my bag or just, you know, wear it pretty much every outfit. I had a similar sort of spring affair happen with a different shawl last year. I made this small triangular shawl called, trying to remember what the pattern is called. From Drops. It was a free pattern from Drops. Fresh Rain. Yes, it was called Fresh Rain, and I really enjoyed wearing that one throughout last spring, but since this one is in a more versatile, for me at least, color, I have been wearing it a lot more than that one. So maybe next year we will have another kind of all about Eve cycle happen and I'll have a different scarf. Push these ones aside, but we'll see. When I was just knitting the scarf, I wasn't really sure about the size. I felt like it was sort of neither here nor there, not as big and warm as a winter scarf, but at the same time not as small and elegant as the Elise scarf or the Sophie scarf, for example. But then I kind of saw it in its final form. I finished knitting it and realized that this size of a scarf is basically the most convenient size you can have for a spring or like a transitional scarf. So I really love it. As I said, I only have one small gripe about the yarn. I was using Lana Gatto Camel hair. It's 60% merino and 40% camel, and the camel part of the composition turned out to be just camel fluff. It's kind of the same as with some cashmeres where nothing is holding this fluff together. It's not rowing, but it's really loosely spun together, and it just spills immediately. Like it pills from you looking at it. So I would definitely not use this yarn again, especially for a garment. And I'm kind of glad that when I saw this yarn and wanted to try it because of how just nice and soft it is, plus I really like the color, I'm really glad that my local yarn store only had 2 balls of this. If they had more, I would have bought a sweater quantity and I would have ended up with a really bubbly and pilly sweater. So I'm glad I didn't do it. And I think in the future, I would use a similar approach to kind of try new yarns, especially if they're on the pricey side. I would buy a really limited quantity to make a small accessory from and just see how I like them, see how they behave. This is how much I have left of this yarn, just a couple of meters. I ended up increasing until I was out of the first ball and then started the decreases with the second ball immediately. I think my scarf is like this much wider than the original, but I just wanted to use all of this yarn like as much as I could, and I was successful. I think it's like 2 meters of yarn in here. Like probably I will tie a present with it instead of like just throwing it away. But yeah, I would probably not use this yarn in the future unless I pair it with a mohair or something. It's way too soft, loose, and pilly for me. But again, if you're looking for a really soft yarn that is similar to cashmere but maybe less expensive, then you can try this one. But yeah, beware that it's gonna build just as cashmere does. My last finished object for today is also a scarf, but to be honest, I would classify it as a shawl instead. This is a standard triangular shawl, I would say, but the pattern is called Scarf Number 2 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. If you watched my December episodes by any chance, you might remember this yarn. This is the Advent mini skeins I gifted to myself back in December, and I really wanted to find a special project for these yarns. I wanted a triangular shawl that is knit top down so I can incorporate my hand-dyed yarns as a fade or like a gradient, and turns out it was a lot harder to find this specific pattern and this specific construction on Ravelry than I expected. I knew exactly what I wanted, so I didn't want a scarf or shawl that is knit like from one side to the other. I didn't want a half circle. I didn't want any like color blocking or asymmetrical construction. I also didn't want a shawl that has edges that kind of curl inwards on itself, like you probably know what I'm talking about. So I had this really specific vision in mind, but I wasn't really able to find this specific option to select in advanced search features on Ravelry. Maybe I missed something, but when I selected top down as a construction method, it gave me all of the patterns, like all of the shawl patterns, because I think it depends on like your perspective. Like anything can be top down. Like, do you count top down like this or like this, or you know, this? Everything can be top down if you think about it, if you're talking about a scarf. Anyway, I knew that I had to look through the patterns manually and just see what I like. And I just have one question for designers, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not a designer shamer. I'm not like a snarker or body pooper or anything like that, but I have one genuine question. Why is it so hard to include a picture on the pattern page for your scarf or your shawl or like your beautiful design? Why is it so hard to include a picture where you can see the scarf or shawl laying flat so you can see the shape and you can see the construction? I'm sure it's really fun to pose like this or like this, or I don't know, like this, but this doesn't tell me anything about your pattern, which you're basically advertising on Ravelry. It's like your product page, and I really want to see what it looks like and what the shape looks like before I buy it, you know? There were just way too many patterns where I had to go to the project pictures to try and deduce what the shape of the shawl or scarf is. And on the project page, people don't really have an obligation to show you the schematic or like a flat lay picture of their finished object. They're basically showing it off. If you're a designer, please include a really basic picture of a shawl where I can just see its construction, please. So I was ready to give up and I decided I would freestyle the shawl. I actually cast on my first sort of draft attempt, but then I found the Scarf Number 2 pattern. I remembered that I bought it back in 2023 and I actually have the pattern printed out. So I frogged my first attempt and started knitting this, and I'm so happy with how it turned out. It's exactly as I envisioned it. So I used a solid pistachio color for the moss stitch kind of textured sections, and in these pearl bump but basically stockinette sections, I decided I would fade and like incorporate all of the hand-dyed speckled yarns I have, from like the lightest to the most sort of pinkish ones. And I also wanted to use these two pink yarns, but I knew I wouldn't have had enough for a full repeat, especially since I was making every stripe sort of bigger in the speckled yarn section. So I wanted to use it as like a border. I wanted to make either a 2x2 rib or like 3x2 rib border along the edge. But then when I actually joined the pink yarn, I realized just how much it clashes with this color combination. These colors work together beautifully. These speckled sections have some of this pistachio in them, and it just really works together perfectly. But as soon as I introduce the pink, everything falls apart. This was just way too bright for this shawl, so I unraveled a couple of rows I did finish, and then I introduced the green yarn again and just bound off in an I-cord. I really like the result. I actually did another kind of small modification. I did an I-cord edge at the sides here, but in hindsight it wasn't really the best idea because this I-cord like on the diagonal is really tight. I didn't increase with a yarn over, I made a stitch instead, and unfortunately when you do this type of increase it tightens the I-cord even more. So I think around here I switched to making a stitch without actually twisting the leg from which you kind of pick up the stitch. I couldn't really switch to doing yarn overs because it would have been too noticeable, but it did make it a little bit more loose. Here you can really tell the difference between like this section and how like not budging it is, and this one. But yeah, maybe don't do an I-cord where it doesn't ask for an I-cord, especially if you're doing this type of construction, or just do yarn overs instead of M1 stitch increases. The only reason I didn't go back and start over is because at that point I already weaved in all of my ends for this section and I really didn't want to unpick all of them and like do it again, so I just left it. But it is quite tight. I did block this shawl pretty aggressively. I think it grew maybe like 20 centimeters in each direction, which made it a little bit bigger, but it's still not as big as I would have liked. So I wasn't able to figure out how to wear it, how to style it yet. I'm not really a type of person who wears pins or something like that, so I don't really know how to tie it without like having it fall off my shoulders, especially since during springtime before it gets too warm I either wear a nylon bomber jacket or a leather trench coat, and both of them are way too smooth for this scarf to stay firm, stay put on my shoulders. But when I do tie it in like a knot here, it looks way too bulky and it runs up too much right here, so it's just like this blob on my neck. So wasn't really able to find a way to really wrap it and style it. I know that a lot of people wear shawls like this, but I don't know, it's not really my style. I really feel like my high school arts and crafts teacher when I have a shawl draped around my neck like this, so I'm not really sure this is the way I'm gonna wear it, but I'll figure something out. But I do really like this color scheme, and I think the gradient in between the different mini skeins, it has I think 3 mini skeins in here, is pretty seamless. And I do genuinely recommend the scarf number 2 pattern. It's originally intended for just one colorway, but I think you can easily customize it for different colors and like different striped effects if you want to. It has 2 sizes. It has a bandana version and a bigger kind of scarf shawl version, so it's charted for both of the versions, and it also has detailed written instructions for both small and the large version. Because of that, the pattern actually looks really intimidating. It looks like there are like a million pages of instructions, like it's a knitting dissertation or something. But I think the amount of instructions and sort of redundancy this pattern has will be really useful for a beginner. So definitely just make sure you go through the pattern file before printing it out if you want to print it out, and just print out the pages you need, you know. But in general, I think it's a really nice pattern. I think I would definitely make it again in a smaller version, or maybe I would actually use the leftover Advent yarns to make another smaller version to gift to a friend, but we'll see. I don't think a lot of people will enjoy wearing sock yarn with mohair against their neck. I think if I don't come up with anything, these mohairs will also go towards my delusional Botanica idea project, but we'll see. Now let's move on to works in progress, and unfortunately my first one is really tragic, so grab some tissues. You will probably need them because it will make you cry, or like, okay, maybe it won't make you cry, but it's such a silly situation and such a dumb chain of events. And this is my Sirena sweater, which would have been finished by now, to be honest, but unfortunately all of this, spoiler, is getting frogged because I don't have enough yarn to see this project through. I was using this yarn, which is Yarna Opera, and I already mentioned it twice. I told you how much I love it, how much I like the pearly and like heathered nature of this yarn, and It's from a yarn store called Yarna, which is our big Ukrainian yarn store. They mostly have their own brand. It's kind of similar to Lion brand in terms of like variety of their own like store brand yarns. I was eyeing this yarn for a while. I really wanted to make a cabled sweater from it, but the cabled quantity, so to speak, would have been way too expensive for me. So I finally sort of bit the bullet and bought the yarn. But when I was swatching for the Sirena sweater, I realized that I like the 2-strand version a lot more than the 1-strand version. This yarn is not as fluffy as like Puno, for example, even though it's a similar sort of ribbon chainette construction. I didn't have the money to buy like 2x quantity of this yarn at that point. I bought some, and when I was sort of confirming my order, I asked them if they have it in stock, if they have it available so I can buy it maybe like a couple of weeks later. And they said, and I quote, "Yes, don't worry about it, we have it." Yes, don't worry about it, we have it. That's what they said. I started to knit my Sirena sweater with the yarn I had. I posted, for some stupid reason, I posted this swatch to my stories and they reposted it. You see where I'm going with this? It's like foreshadowing for you. Everything was going great. I was in love with this knit. It was going by so fast because it's knit on 5.5mm needles. I did size down to 5, but it was still a really sort of chunky and quick knit. Then like a week, or I think it was 2 weeks later, I go to their website to order more, and they have only 1 ball left in stock. They tell me that it's discontinued. In the span of like 2 weeks, this yarn went from "yes, we have it, don't worry" to "it's discontinued, we're not gonna be bringing more in stock, it's just, no, it's not available anymore." And I think the fact that they reposted this story where you can like see sort of a pattern idea or like texture idea made from this yarn in this specific colorway made somebody buy it, probably because they do have quite a large following. I was really panicking at that point. I tried to look through other stores that carry Yarna. I tried to go through our version of Facebook Marketplace to see if maybe somebody's selling it, but no, it's a really specific yarn. It's not a novelty yarn, but it's really hard to find substitute for. I kept knitting and trying to convince myself that since this is a chain net yarn, it will probably stretch a little bit and the meterage is actually longer than indicated on a ball. But then I joined my front and back to knit in the round, and this one cable eats up 2 balls like this because I'm holding it double. So I realized I would be out of yarn even before I start the sleeves. Yeah, I was sort of devastated. I think there was a moment where I started to like frantically frogging it and decided I would just like frog this whole project, but then I was like, no, maybe I'll make a vest. And I joined another ball of yarn again, and I knit, well, quite a bit. Like this amount of work I did already knowing that this project is not going to work out. And I also decided I would make the neckline before I decide if I frog it or make it into a vest. And the problem is I don't need a vest. I want this specific sweater in this specific size. I did consider making a smaller size, but a smaller, almost no positive ease cabled sweater would look way too bulky on me, especially in this gauge. So I scrapped this idea, and I thought that I would maybe like bite the bullet and buy another colorway, which will cost me a lot of money, but I was way too invested in this project and felt way too kind of unhinged at that point that I was like, okay, I'm gonna spend more money and buy another colorway, because they did have another colorway of the same yarn in stock, but I asked them if I can sort of set it aside until like the beginning of April when I get my paycheck, basically. The thing is, my top budget for a knitted garment, like for a sweater quantity, is like 60 euros, I think. But here I would need to show like, I don't know, 120 euros for the sweater quantity to make the size I want in the amount of yarn I need. Yeah, anyway, they said no, they don't set aside yarns like this. They don't do that, which is like fine, reasonable, understandable. But then they, in the next message, they said, we have 6 kilograms of this yarn, so don't worry. It's one of the biggest yarn stores here in Ukraine. So if 6 people, for example, decide in those 2 weeks that they want a sweater from this yarn, I will be out. Like if 10 people decide they want a vest from this yarn, I will be out of luck again. So I felt like I didn't want to deal with them anymore. I didn't want to give them any more money. I can't say that it's their fault specifically, but it kind of is, because why would you say that you have it available and I shouldn't worry and I can buy it like whenever, if it was actually until stock lasts and it's discontinued forever, you know? I messaged another yarn store to see if they can help me combine this yarn with something else, because if we're talking about a single strand quantity, I did have a lot of it. I had about 800 grams of this yarn. I didn't want to add silk mohair to it because the gauge would have been too thin for the Sirena sweater. I knew I needed to add another yarn in like a similar weight. So that other yarn store gave me two options, both from Gazzal. The first one was this Gazzal Rock'n'Roll yarn, which it's pretty much the same yarn, except this one is a lot more scratchy. It's almost entirely synthetic, 70% polyamide, but the color is spot on, it's just a little bit darker. And another one was Gazzal Alpaca Air, which I couldn't find anywhere in the apartment, so I'm gonna insert a picture. And Alpaca Air is really similar to Puno. I did two swatches, one with the Alpaca Air yarn and another one with the Gazzal yarn, and I didn't like both of them because in this one you can definitely see that one yarn is matte and another one is a lot more pearly and shiny. You can see which stitch has more of the Alpaca Air and which stitch has more of the opera yarn. I just didn't like the marling effect. And the swatch with the cheaper yarn is fine, I guess, but it's really scratchy, and also it's a lot more shiny than my original yarn, which makes this fabric look kind of too shiny and too tacky for me. So I felt like it would have been such a waste to mix them together. It's like mixing supermarket acrylic and Cardiff cashmere. Like, so yeah, I gave up. I was just drained at that point and really frustrated. I didn't even know that a knitting project can frustrate and annoy me so much as this one. It felt like I spent basically whole of March making swatches and unraveling and trying again and messaging yarn stores, making swatches again and unraveling again and then vacuuming. I was done and I'm not gonna be making the Sirena sweater from this yarn, at least. I still really like the pattern. I think it's a wonderful pattern. I have nothing bad to say about it. It's beautiful, it's very well written. I really like the fact that the pattern has a swatch chart for you to specifically see if your kind of different cable textures align with the gauge indicated in the pattern, so you can choose the size accordingly. It's a really well thought out pattern, but not today, not in this lifetime, not from this yarn. So yeah, I'm gonna be frogging this. I knit a lot more than I needed to while I was again panic knitting, because it was just such a pleasant experience knitting this, and this yarn is wonderful, but I don't think I'm going to be buying from Yarna again. I think it's a good opportunity to maybe explore some other brands and some other options. And yeah, I feel like I'm being punished for not being able to afford the full quantity at the same time. I was trying to budget and be mindful about what I'm buying and kind of plan in advance, and it really bit me in the ass. So yeah, I don't recommend doing that. And to make myself feel better, I allowed myself to break my Petiteknit ban. Who would have thought? Who would have predicted this turn of events? I think I lasted about a month without knitting a Petiteknit pattern, and only because I spent, as I said, the whole month of March making stupid swatches and unraveling and redoing the Sirena sweater. But yeah, I made the ultimate swatch, and I'm gonna be making the Jenny jacket at some point. Not right now, because I'm way too happy and involved with my other whips. I paired this yarn with a silk mohair that I had, which is also from Yarna. It's their Soft Dream mohair, which I talked about many times before. I decided I would do the V-neck version because, unlike the Jenny sweater and the Jenny regular crew neck cardigan, it's knit top down instead of bottom up. I might actually change the neckline anyway to make it a crew neck neckline instead of a V-neck, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. I do really enjoy smoking. Yeah, I do enjoy smoking. Yeah, that's true. I do really enjoy smocking, and I think it would be a fun way to kind of turn this whole situation around. You know what I just realized? I completely forgot to mention that on one of the occasions, bless you, on one of the occasions when I was still trying to save my Sirena sweater and I was like frantically knitting it, my Chaugu needles snapped. Thankfully, this is the first pair of Chaugu needles I ever bought. I know it because it has this little dent on it. I bought it in, I think, beginning of 2020. Was the first pair of fancy needles I gifted to myself. I think before that, the most I spent on a pair of needles was like $1. Yeah, it served me quite well. Served me for about 5 years, but it was a low blow, especially with this kind of project already going really well. So yeah, rest in peace. I was so upset and so frustrated about this project that my boyfriend started to notice, and at some point he offered for me to take the sweater I knit for him and unravel to make a Sirena sweater instead. And his logic was that since he wears a much larger size than me, the yardage would be enough for me to make a cable sweater in my size. And it was just so nice of him. Of course I said no, because first of all, it wouldn't have been enough. And second of all, I'm not gonna unravel his sweater to make up for a yarn store's mistake, but it was really sweet of him. And speaking of my boyfriend, I did start a birthday sweater for him. I'm intending to gift him a sweater on his birthday, which is on the 29th. So I sure hope I can finish it in time. I already got a head start. I cast it on a couple of weeks ago, and I was working on my other whip, so my progress is not as extensive as I would have liked, but I am picking up speed now. The pattern is the Heather sweater, and this pattern was kindly and really unexpectedly gifted to me by my viewer Cheryl. So thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for supporting my knitting projects and kind of contributing to my boyfriend's birthday gift. I just really like this pattern. It's really straightforward. I like the shoulder construction here, and this waffle texture is really easy to memorize, really easy to follow. I'm making the largest size, but I did increase on the shoulders here for a couple more rows than the pattern suggests, just because I wanted it to be a little bit more slouchy on him. There's just one silly thing I haven't considered when I was selecting this pattern. This waffle texture is a 4-row repeat, and on the last row, which is a wrong side row, you knit all stitches to make this pearl bump. And of course, when you join your work in the round, your wrong side becomes your right side, and you can't knit anymore, you have to purl. And I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, I hate purling, I hate doing gauge swatches. No, but when I purl, and I think I mentioned it before, it's because I taught myself how to knit from YouTube videos, and I was looking at how the stitch should look in the end, as opposed to how I should hold my yarn while making the stitch. So every time I purl, I sort of drop my yarn and pick it up again every time I make another stitch. So it's like I'm making a knot every time, and it's really slow going, so to speak. What I came up with was to basically turn and do a wrong side row every 4 rounds. I don't think you can really tell that I'm doing this really weird short row thing every time I try and go back and forth from flat knitting to circular knitting. And when I knit the sleeves, I think I might not join them in the round at all and just knit them flat or flappy here, and then just seam them up just to make it easier on myself and not do these 4 short rows every time I need to do this purl bump round. Otherwise, I really enjoy this pattern. The yarn I'm using is Alize Wooltime, which is a sock yarn technically. I always thought, and I think I said in a podcast a couple of times, that it's a 6-ply sock yarn, but no, it's a 4-ply sock yarn, but it's just a little bit chunkier than regular sock yarn, and it's a budget yarn, but the quality is pretty fine. I think it will hold up pretty well. I think the texture will open up nicely once it's blocked, and it is really soft, so I'm happy I chose it. I did go down in needle size to get gauge. I went up to 4.5. Yeah, I just hope I can finish it in time. I do need to work on it every day if I want to be able to gift it to him on his birthday. Since I don't have any acquisitions to show you besides the yarn I bought to try and rescue my Sirena sweater, I'm gonna finish this video off with my last work in progress, and this is my Harriet sweater. I can't wait to finish this one. It's really beautiful. I'm intending to finish it before Worldwide Vyshyvanka Day, to wear it instead of a vyshyvanka. This project wasn't without its challenges. Maybe you can already see the challenge I encountered while knitting this, but in general, I really enjoyed knitting it. I modified the neckline. I decided that I want to do this double knit edging on the neckline. I've never done it before, so it was really fun to try. I think it came out quite wonky still, but I did my best. It was a lot of work because I basically had to double my stitch count to do the double knit rounds, and I had to size down to 2mm needles for this, but then I knit the ribbing instead of a 1x1 rib and a longer mock neck. I decided to knit a half twisted folded rib, and I really like the result. I think it looks really neat, even again for a first double knit edging attempt. And I really like these sleeves. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce that word. I'm one of those people who knows a bunch of words only from reading, so contiguous. I'm gonna shoot with contiguous. So contiguous sleeve. I really like the nature of the sleeve. It was really interesting to knit it, and I like how sort of set it is. And I am making this sweater in a smaller gauge because my yarn has a smaller gauge than the pattern suggests. So I'm making size 2 to get size 1, and I'm not using 4mm, I'm using 3.5mm needles, and for the color work I'm increasing to 3.75. I'm using this Loch Lomond yarn from BC Garn as my contrast color, and for my main color I'm using this Samila Melange. This Samila Melange yarn is a little bit thinner than the Loch Lomond yarn, which in turn gives me this almost like 3D effect on my color work. It looks either like it was embroidered or like it was a duplicate stitch, but in a good way. I really like this textured effect. The green yarn is my leftover like scrappy vintage Einband yarn. I'm only using the green at the very beginning of the panel and at the very end, just so it doesn't clash too much, because when I was looking through the traditional Ukrainian Vishvanka patterns, I noticed that it either uses red on a white background or red with black. But if it uses colors like green or blue, I don't know, yellow, it usually a mix of different colors, so it's at least like 5 colors. So if I want to make it a bit more traditional, a bit more like a Vyshyvanka, I can't really mix red with blue or like with green. I really like working with this Loch Lomond and Samila yarns. To be honest, they smell really nice. Like they smell so sweet. Like I really like this sheepy barn smell. I know some people really hate it, but for me it's just perfection. It's like smelling fur on your cat, you know? It's just this really fresh, really soft, comforting scent. So yeah, really weird review of this yarn, but I do really like how sheepy it smells, and it's really soft in general. I think it will open up so well with blocking because the swatch I made really bloomed. So I really can't wait to finish this one just so I can see how this yarn blooms and how the color work opens up. But I do have one issue with this project, and the thing is, I noticed this issue right when I was kind of recovering from my Sirena Sweater experience, and it was such a below the belt blow. To be honest, it was just... So, this yarn was gifted to me by my friend Alena from Knitting Your Life channel, and she sent me this Samila yarn, this red Loch Lomond yarn. I had the most of this colorway, but it was not enough for this whole sweater, for like the main color on the sweater. So I asked her to order more for me because I can't really find it in Ukraine, so I had to buy it through her. And again, I wasn't worried. I was just knitting away on my Harriet sweater, waiting for more yarn to arrive so I can do like the ribbing and the cuffs, blah blah blah. The yarn arrives and it's a completely different dye lot. And of course I don't notice it until like the next day when I knit, you know, this whole portion here on the body. And this one is a lot more warm toned and this one is really gray. You can see that they're different. If you tell me in the comments, really, you can't really tell the difference, it's the same yarn, nobody can tell, I would know that you're lying, because you can clearly see the difference between them. And you know what? I decided I would let it go. I would not let it bother me, because most of the people who would see me wearing this sweater will not even know what a dye lot is, would not care what a dye lot is. So I'm just not going to let it bother me. I will continue knitting my Harriet sweater, which comes out really nicely, if I can say so myself. I think with a little French tuck and like a little, you know, accessorizing, it will not be noticeable too much. Hopefully the next time we meet, I will have both the Harriet sweater and the Heather sweater finished, and maybe finally move on to more late spring summer knits, because I am really craving them. The Sirena Sweater situation took up so much of my time that I really think I missed this like window of finishing my more wintry knits and starting more warm weather projects, but I hope I can get back on track. And yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much for joining me, for spending this time with me. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would really love to see you here again. If you want to support the channel, you can check out my wish list on Ravelry, but you don't have to. Just the fact that you're watching is enough. I wish you a lovely day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.